Just live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The Prime Minister says he's confident the government can make good on its 100-day action plan. At his first post-cabinet media conference since taking office, Christopher Luxon has laid out 49 actions the coalition government will take. Much of the plan is repealing laws introduced by the previous government, such as fair pay agreements and reforms to the Resource Management Act. It also intends to start on a number of commitments National agreed to as part of its deals with ACT and New Zealand First. Mr Luxon says the plan is ambitious but necessary.
We know there's a lot in it. We know there's a lot of, we've got a massive amount of ambition. We know we're biting off a lot in order to get it done, but we're determined to do so.
And the first piece of legislation the new government intends to introduce is to return the Reserve Bank to a single mandate of fighting inflation. The Prime Minister has refused to condemn comments made by the Deputy Prime Minister towards media. Winston Peters has labelled the $55 million Public Interest Journalism Fund a bribe and accused state-funded media TVNZ and RNZ of not being independent from government. Christopher Luxon says he also did not support the Public Interest Journalism Fund, but Mr Peters' comments are not how he would have expressed it.
We are now in a coalition government. We have three parties in this government. There will be different personalities, there will be different ways of expressing things. It may not be the way that I would express everything all the time, but it's important that everyone understands that.
Christopher Luxon says, rightly or wrongly, the Public Interest Journalism Fund led to perceptions of bias. Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau has admitted she has a drinking problem after another incident of drunken behaviour in public. The admission follows questions by RNZ about what happened in an inner-city bar 2 weekends ago. In a written statement to RNZ, the Mayor says she has a problem with alcohol. She says to her great embarrassment and shame, the incident seems to have been recorded. Ms Whanau says she sought counsel from friends, family and colleagues and is getting professional help. The Reserve Bank has left its benchmark interest rate unchanged as expected, and repeated rates will stay high for an extended period. The official cash rate was held at 5.5% this afternoon. The central bank has repeated that inflation is slowing due to interest rate rises, but that it still remains too high. Central Bank Governor Adrian Orr says there is still an increased risk of inflation.
Let me be clear, inflation is declining. Where we are nervous is it declining fast enough for us to succeed in the lowest cost fashion to the rest of the economy? When we start from a very elevated level of consumer price inflation, we have limited headroom to absorb additional inflation surprises.
Adrian Orr says population growth is affecting demand, which increases the risk of inflation remaining above its 1 to 3% target. Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown says a proposal to sell the operating lease for the Port of Auckland is about utilising council assets. The Mayor is proposing a multi-billion-dollar regional wealth fund funded by the proposed sale of Auckland Airport shares and leasing the port operations. The proposed fund would make provisions for climate change risks and help reduce rates rises. Mr Brown has been accused of asset stripping, but he denies this.
It's not asset stripping, it's asset utilising. At the moment, we are asset stripping off ratepayers because we take more money off them just to prop up the ownership of those two things.
Wayne Brown wants the proposal to go out for public consultation. To sport now, and it's taken just one ball for New Zealand to wrap up Bangladesh's first innings on day 2 of the first cricket test in Sylhet. Resuming at 310 for 9, Black Cap skipper Tim Southee took the final wicket with his first ball of the day. Spinner Glenn Phillips was the most successful of the bowlers, taking 4 wickets. New Zealand's first innings has just gone underway, and a short time ago they were 11 without loss. New Zealand Rugby won't be changing its selection criteria around overseas-based players anytime soon. All Blacks captain Sam Cane has suggested a review of the rules that prohibit the selection of overseas-based players. Cane made the comment on his arrival in Japan, where he'll play for Suntory Sangoliath over the next few months. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
While Cane won't miss any internationals, other All Blacks such as Richie Mo'unga have signed multi-year overseas deals, ruling them out of All Black selection unless the NZR changes its rules. In a statement, the NZR said its current rules are key to New Zealand's rugby success. Former All Blacks coach Ian Foster has previously stated that changing the rules would be a disaster. But new All Blacks coach Scott Robertson said at the time of his appointment in April that he was open to change. But the NZR statement essentially puts the kibosh on any such possibility, saying change is not foreseeable in the short term and would require significant consultation.
And that's the news.
Landlords get an extra $1 billion tax boost,
The policy brings in interest rate predictability both faster and more aggressively.
while the Climate Minister stands by his government's plans.
The way in which this government is going to tackle climate change is different from the prior government.
And Chris Hipkins takes aim at the new government.
He should certainly be pulling Winston Peters into line, although at this point it seems like Winston Peters is running the show rather than Christopher Luxon.
Your news show, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Taranaki, partly cloudy. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty in the central high country, cloudy periods and a few showers, becoming fine in Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, isolated showers, clearing in Gisborne tomorrow evening. Wairarapa, also Whanganui to Wellington, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Wairarapa, clearing this evening. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, scattered showers mainly inland this evening. Becoming fine tomorrow morning, but cloudy periods remaining in Westland. For Canterbury, fine spells, but isolated showers inland, becoming cloudy tomorrow and showers becoming widespread this evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods mainly in the south, isolated showers about the south coast, spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National, it's 5:07 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi ana, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Just days into the new coalition, and Christopher Luxon has already been accused of losing control of his cabinet. Labour is challenging the new Prime Minister to lay down the law and rein in his outspoken deputy, Winston Peters, as New Zealand First continues to cause a sideshow. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Taking his place behind the prime ministerial podium.
Welcome to what is our very first post-cabinet press conference in the beginning of the 54th Parliament.
Christopher Luxon, fresh from chairing his second cabinet meeting this week. Ministers signed off on the new 100-day plan this afternoon, a three-way coalition collaboration.
And that work starts today.
The agenda is a mix of things out and in. Cell phones in schools are out, pseudoephedrine and cold medicine in. The clean car discount will be scrapped, so too 3 Waters, and Labour's RMA changes.
It is ambitious, and that's because we are frankly ambitious for New Zealand.
It's a hefty workload for a cabinet which has so far been dogged by distractions, driven partly by the new deputy, Winston Peters. Since the day the deal was signed, the New Zealand First Leader has repeatedly upstaged the Prime Minister, derailing events by waging war on the media.
You've lost. You lost. So no, you cannot defend $55 million of bribery. Before you ask one more question, tell the public what you signed up to get the money. This is called transparency.
The antics have given ample fodder to the new opposition and Labour leader Chris Hipkins, today challenging the Prime Minister to show some leadership and pull Mr Peters into line.
I'm not entirely clear that Christopher Luxon's really in control of what's going on within the government, and they're only a couple of days in. It does not bode well for the future.
No disrespect, but I'm not taking any lectures from Chris Hipkins.
Mr Luxon says he would have chosen his words differently from Mr Peters, but shares his frustration with the Public Interest Journalism Fund.
Yes, we're going to say things in different ways as different leaders and as different members of that team in a coalition government, and that's fine, that's acceptable.
It's not the only headache for Mr Luxon, with continuing questions over the government's tax plan. As part of its coalition deal with ACT, National agreed to accelerate a promised tax break for landlords, restoring interest deductibility. The Council of Trade Unions has done the numbers. Its economist Craig Rennie, a former Labour staffer, estimates it will drive up the cost by almost $1 billion.
It'll be Christmas for landlords, and for the tenants, they'll get nothing.
We are determined to be the parties of low tax. We want New Zealanders to keep more of their own money.
That is, except smokers. A key item on National's to-do list is ending the generational ban on smoking. More smokers mean more tobacco tax in the government's coffers. The move has sparked a fierce backlash by health experts this week and made headlines worldwide.
We are a global embarrassment for rolling back these laws.
The former Health Minister Aisha Verrall fired up, suggesting National has caved to big tobacco. Fellow Labour MP Rachel Boyack tweeted, "Looks like getting a tobacco lobbyist into Parliament finally paid off for the tobacco industry." That's a reference to National's Chris Bishop, who worked for Philip Morris from 2011 to 2013.
There is a lot of threads you can pull about what Chris Bishop's background in the tobacco industry is, but ultimately they need to be judged by their actions, which is putting the tobacco lobby ahead of New Zealanders' health.
Yeah, I saw some sort of wild accusations by Aisha Verrall. I think it says more about her than it says about anything else. I mean, it's just nonsense.
The government's work plan will kick up a gear next week, with Parliament finally swinging back into action. The 100-day countdown begins today.
It is 10 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Maritime Union is warning of potentially massive price hikes on freight if the Auckland Mayor pushes through plans to privatise the port. Wayne Brown wants to create an Auckland Future Fund that he says would help cover the cost of running the city and keep rates rises in check. The proposed $3 to $4 billion fund would be financed by selling the council's remaining Auckland International Airport shares and the operating lease for the Auckland port, with the aim of getting a 7.5% return on the fund. As part of the proposal, the Mayor wants the port to return the Captain Cook and Marsden wharfs to the council within 2 years and the car import wharf, Bledisloe, within 15 years. Well, joining us now is Maritime Union's Russell Main. Hi, Russell.
Good afternoon.
What's wrong with this idea?
Well, I can't sort of quite work out why we would want to sell the major asset for Auckland that over the years has produced so much income into Auckland and then invest that into international equities when, I mean, at the moment, I don't know how you can, look to guarantee 7.6% return or whatever it is the Mayor's saying when certainly, superannuation funds and investment portfolios aren't returning that at the moment. So I think it's a very optimistic outlook for a return when I think the port in, over the next 30 years will possibly even return more. And we know that it's a very steady return and it's not at the whim of international markets.
I suppose the thing the Mayor would say is they're not selling the land, they're just selling the operating lease if it were to go ahead. And with a 35-year guarantee of it remaining in the same spot, the port.
Well, 35 years, it amounts to a sale for my children and for the people of Auckland. That locks 35 years in to where an international company will take all the profits out of Auckland. The charges for cargo coming over the wharf will increase. I mean, we can prove that out of Australia.
OK, tell us about that, Russell. I'm really interested in that, and so will people and businesses be. So how much do you reckon freight costs would rise, and where are you getting that information from?
Well, DP World just 3 weeks ago put up the cost for the containers by 57% in Australia. Those we have circulated reports where container charges that started at like $6 are now $125, $135. And I think if you speak to the freight forwarders and companies in Australia, they would love to turn the clock back on their ports and have their ports owned in a public fashion and not at the mercy of an international company.
So, do you have an idea of an annual cost, what an annual cost of increases would be in terms of forecasting if it were to be sold off?
Look, I haven't got that at my fingertips, but I mean, common sense would say that if you're going to lease a port and you're going to lease it for $1 billion, $2 billion, first of all, you've got to get back your lease money, and then you've got to make profit on top of that. So I think you can put 20, 25%, 30%, and even a lot more on the current charges. And I think being the only port in Auckland in the foreseeable future, and that will probably be in the next 20 to 30 years, God knows what it will be then.
So, Russell, the Mayor, sorry to interrupt, but Mayor Wayne Brown says that the assets, that is the port and the airport shares, that they are costing ratepayers more to hold those, so it is a false economy.
I think that's a very disingenuous approach, especially when you look at the ports of Auckland through some very poor governance and management decisions embarked on an automated process that removed all profit from the port. When, if you look back in 2011, it was returning between 60 and 80 million there. The forecast, and it's on forecast to be back at 52 million. And look, I'm extremely confident that over the next 2 to 5 years, it could easily be well above the 100 million mark, because it is the only gateway into Auckland. And if it's not a profitable business, and it's not the jewel in the crown, why is there so much interest from overseas, and why is DP World willing to pay such an exorbitant price for a lease? Common sense just says that they know they're going to gouge it, and they know they're going to make money out of it, and they don't care.
Thanks for your time, Russell. Really appreciate it. That is Russell Main, who is from the Maritime Union, not keen on the plan that the Mayor has put forward on creating a future investment fund for Auckland. Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau has admitted to more drunken antics in a central city bar. She has confirmed to RNZ that she has a drinking problem after multiple council sources, including supporters of the Mayor, told RNZ about footage showing her in an intoxicated state. Our reporter Nick James has been investigating and he joins us now. Nick, what is the Mayor saying?
She says after she has a problem with alcohol, to quote, "After an incident where I was drunk in public, which to my great embarrassment and shame seems to have been recorded, I sought counsel from my friends, family and colleagues and have since sought professional help," unquote. Several sources have confirmed the Mayor was at a popular Cuba Street establishment on Saturday afternoon 2 weeks ago with friends having a rowdy time, and that this has apparently been captured on video.
Okay, so this is not the first time that the Mayor has got in trouble over her drinking, is it?
No, back in July, she made a public pledge to change her drinking habits after admitting she was, quote, tipsy when she skipped out without paying a restaurant bill. She described it as a misunderstanding. In an interview with News Talk ZB at the time, she said she wouldn't be going out for a drink on Friday night anymore. To quote, "This Friday I'm going to a theatre show, I'm going to go out to stuff, but I'm going to keep certain socialising to my home."
And so what has been the response from other councillors?
RNZ has spoken to several councillors. Most had heard the story and knew about the video in circulation, although they all denied having seen the footage themselves. There's anger among some about the Mayor's antics, with questions about whether her drinking is affecting her ability to do her job, or at least damaging her reputation and by extension making the city look bad. In her statement, she says, "I'm a flawed person, but I care deeply about this city. I will continue to represent the hopes and aspirations of my local community, and I will do so with the compassion and care of those around me and with the professional help required. I would like to say to others struggling with alcohol issues that you can seek help and still commit to your passions, work, family, friends in the way that is meaningful. We are complex, layered people and deserving of love. I would appreciate respect and care from the media whilst navigating this period of sobriety and professional support."
Thank you for that, Nick. That is our reporter Nick James, live from Wellington there, regarding the Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau. She has admitted to more drunken antics at a city bar. A recently retired intensive care specialist is calling for Health Minister Shane Reti's resignation over the government's backtrack on smokefree legislation. The National-led government wants to scrap the legislation, which would have reduced the number of stores able to sell cigarettes to around 600 100 nationwide, limit the strength of nicotine and make it illegal to sell tobacco to anyone born after 2009. But Dr. Stephen Street, who was also the clinical director of Organ Donation New Zealand for more than a decade, says he saw patients get limbs amputated, suffer heart attacks, stroke, lung disease and pneumonia, all from their exposure to smoking. And as Luca Foreman reports, he's not the only one furious about the decision.
As someone whose father and grandfather died from smoking-related illnesses, Rhys Jones doesn't mince his words when talking about the new government's plans.
Can I swear on radio? I think it's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. It's just an absolute joke, and it makes a mockery of it all, you know? And it upsets people who have suffered with family losses through cigarette and smoking and the pain that it causes.
Mr. Jones was a smoker himself, a habit he says he picked up from his family. He quit after his father passed away in 2009. Mr. Jones only recently moved back to New Zealand from Norway with his 2 young kids, who under the previous legislation would never have been able to purchase cigarettes.
You know, that legislation coming through was an attractive prospect for returning expats like myself to raise children in this country. Now that they've gone and switched it, you start thinking, well, is the leadership of this country thinking forward, or are they thinking backward and taking us back?
He urges the new Health Minister to rethink the decision.
I think Shane Reti needs to look himself in the mirror and really think hard about this and the pain that he's going to cause. You know, you're resigning an upcoming generation of kids to have access to cigarettes.
But speaking on Checkpoint last night, Dr. Reti was resolute in defending the policy.
So we're committed to reducing smoking rates in New Zealand. There are concerns around the proposed legislation and to how that would impact on the black market and how that might focus crime on some of the retail premises that we're going to be allowed to continue.
Retired intensive care specialist Dr. Stephen Street contacted Checkpoint after that interview to say Dr. Reti's reasons don't stack up.
There's no evidence about it. There's what Shane Reti calls concerns and reckons, but concerns and reckons don't constitute evidence.
Dr. Street has seen firsthand some of the harm smoking can cause.
I certainly saw people in whom it was quite clear that smoking had contributed to loss of limb, you know, from peripheral gangrene, heart attacks, stroke, chronic lung disease, which meant that they were predisposed to develop pneumonia.
He says it's disappointing that Reti is defending the policy as a medical professional himself.
It's shameful behaviour. He's a disgrace to the profession. He's no right to be the Minister of Health. He should resign.
However, Shane Reti told Checkpoint that he was pleased with the progress already made on smoking rates, and he remains committed to reducing them further. Numerous health organisations are strongly opposing the changes, including the Royal New Zealand College of GPs, the Cancer Society and the Asthma Respiratory Foundation.
Luca Foreman with that report. Do send us your feedback on that one too. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. The government's first 100 days starts now. They've put out a list of what they hope to achieve in that 100 days. Let us know your thoughts on what their priorities are. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines now. Anna is standing by. Ko Anna anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has set out 49 actions his coalition government will take in its first 100 days, saying the plan is ambitious but necessary. The coalition aims to repeal legislation introduced by the previous Labour government, including fair pay agreements, the clean car discount and 3 waters. Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown says selling the council's remaining airport shares and privatising the port would raise billions of dollars to cover the rising costs of running the city, keep rate rises in check and make provisions for climate change. But critics say his proposed Auckland Future Fund is asset stripping, which Mr Brown denies. He wants the public to have its say. Wellington Mayor Tori Whanau says she's getting professional help for a drinking problem. The admission comes after an incident at a city bar a fortnight ago. The Crown says the case against the man convicted of murdering 2 Swedish backpacks in 1989 remains solid, despite the original prosecution using false evidence from a prison inmate. David Tamahiri is appealing his 1990 conviction for the murders of Urban Hoagland and Heidi Parkinen. The Court of Appeal has today reserved its decision. And the Reserve Bank says interest rate rises are slowing inflation, but it remains too high. It's today kept the official cash rate at 5.5%. And just a traffic notification for commuters in Auckland due to a track fault. Manukau trains are cancelled and Southern Line trains will run at 20-minute frequency. Scheduled buses will accept rail tickets between Otahu and Manukau. Lisa, those are the headlines.
Thank you, Anna. All Blacks captain Sam Cane thinks New Zealand Rugby should reconsider not picking overseas-based players for the All Blacks. Cane has just started a sabbatical in Japan, and while he won't miss any tests, others, like Richie Mo'unga, have signed multi-year deals offshore that rule them out of All Blacks contention. Well, joining us now is sports reporter Jonty Dine. So a bit of a can of worms, Jonty.
Yeah, no, it is a bit. This has been a long debate about whether or not it would weaken the game in this country, and would it mean there'd be no incentive for players to stay. But Cane has come out and said he thinks New Zealand Rugby should at least have the conversation. We've seen the Springboks and Wallabies both select overseas players, and of course the former current world champions. But based on their response today, he probably shouldn't hold his breath. A New Zealand Rugby spokesperson said the existing criteria is a key foundation of New Zealand Rugby's legacy and success. They added, any significant change to the criteria is not foreseeable and would require significant consultation. So status quo for now, it seems, but both former and current All Black coaches Scott Robinson and Ian Foster have weighed in on either side of the argument. Robinson saying he'll be open to the idea, while Foster thinks it would be a disaster. Of course, Cane and Ardie Savea, they've both signed sabbaticals to miss the Super Rugby season, but they'll both be back in New Zealand for the first All Blacks tests in July. But however, others such as Mo'unga, who you mentioned, Brodie Retallick, Aaron Smith, Beauden Barrett, they all won't be eligible to play for the All Blacks next year, which Cane would like to see change.
A lot of the Springboks have shown the ability to play in the top League One and go back to international rugby fairly quickly. I think the challenge for us guys who are on the shorter term deals, who will be returning in the hope of playing international rugby again, is that we play really well here and then we get back, and should we get the opportunity to represent the All Blacks again, that we show that we've improved our games, or if not, kick off where we left off. So that's the challenge, and I think if we can do that, then maybe that conversation can be had at New Zealand Rugby.
So Cane's predecessor, Kieran Reid, he's also responded to this. He doesn't think New Zealand Rugby could survive by selecting overseas players. He says we need them in the country to engage the fans and get them to the games. The All Blacks have obviously lost a lot of talent over the years to the likes of Europe and Asia. You could argue Charles Piutau, Carl Heyman, Nick Evans, Stephen Luatua, Malakai Fekitoa, all these players were at the peak of their powers when they did leave. And even just this year, we saw Lester Whanganuku, Brad Weber, Nepo Lalala, Jack Goodhue and Peter Gus Sowakola all depart. So this is going to continue to be a debate, Lisa.
OK, Black Caps, how are they getting on in Bangladesh?
Not too bad. It actually took just one ball today to bowl out the host. So Tim Southee finished off the innings with the opening ball to dismiss Bangladesh for 310. So they were really cruising on day one, but there was an unlikely hero for the Black Caps. It was Glenn Phillips who came through with 4 wickets to even the honours, though Bangladesh will probably be the most disappointed after such a strong start. They were 180 for 2 and were 310 for stumps. Phillips, he's never bowled in a test before, and his first test wicket came from an absolutely rank full toss, so he's actually a bit embarrassed to get it with such an awful delivery.
I mean, I've dreamed of getting my first test wicket for a long time, and that was not how I thought I was going to get it. Obviously, I've got out to full tosses, every batsman's got out to full tosses, and today I just got a little bit lucky.
So just a short time ago, New Zealand were 11 without loss with Devon Conway and Tom Latham at the crease.
Thank you, Jonty. Sports reporter Jonty Dine there. Only he can be the killer. Crown lawyers have been laying out their case as to why they believe David Tamahere is responsible for the deaths of 2 Swedish backpackers 34 years ago. He was convicted of the murders of Urban Höglund and Heidi Parkkonen in 1990. The case is at the Court of Appeal because the former Governor-General declared a royal prerogative of mercy, which triggered the appeal hearing. Jemima Houston has been in court.
The Crown maintains the evidence against David Tamahere is still solid, despite false testimony being a key part of its original case. That evidence was given by inmate Roberto Conchi-Harris, who said Mr Tamahere had confessed to the murders, but was later found to have lied. Crown lawyer Rebecca Thompson argues it wasn't given great weight by the jury in the 1990 trial because the judge made it clear the evidence was unreliable.
We do have the judges summing up, recording second-hand its excoriating conclusion on Mr Harris's account as a complete fabrication. Everything either taken from newspaper stories or it was so bizarre as to be unbelievable.
Ms Thompson says the other circumstantial evidence, such as Mr Tamahere being seen with a woman who looked like Heidi Parkkonen, holds up. She says putting Mr Harris's evidence before the jury would not have affected the overall outcome.
If one slender strand of the rope is eliminated, that doesn't weaken the whole rope beyond repair. And the Crown admits that the Harris evidence was that type of a slender strand. When you remove it, the force of the Crown case remains.
But Justice Miller told the Crown lawyer the court will not speculate about what the jury might have done, particularly considering it was divided during deliberations.
So if we are not willing to accept your submission that the jury can't have attached much weight to it, then we are in miscarriage territory at that point, are we not?
Ms Thompson says even if the court decides the perjured evidence led to a miscarriage of justice, that evidence was simply an irregularity at the trial.
Only Mr Tamahere knows how and why and where he killed Heidi Parkkonen and Urban Höglund. But only he can be the killer.
Mr Tamahere's defence lawyer, James Carruthers, says the Crown's case and the evidential landscape has shifted greatly since it was put to the jury in 1990. He urged the court to be cautious in its consideration of whether to dismiss the appeal.
No doubt the court, if it reaches that stage, will remind itself of the real risk, well established, of wrongful convictions arising out of identification evidence and prison informant evidence.
The court has reserved its decision. Justice French says she can't give an accurate timeframe except that the judgment will not be released until the new year.
Obviously we want to get this right and we need time to do that.
RNZ understands the likely options for the court are that the original verdict is upheld, there is a retrial, or Mr Tamahere could be acquitted.
It is 28 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio. Okay, the Kiwi spiked following the Reserve Bank's decision on the official cash rate. This was the decision not to go anywhere, just stay put. What did it say?
Well, it said that, but it said it with a warning, pretty explicit in a way. What the Reserve Bank is saying is that given the big spike we've seen already in population growth, so that's net migration, up higher than most were expecting, has put pressure into the economy, which is driving ongoing inflation. Isn't satisfied that it's under control yet, and so signaled that there's potential for another rate hike in the new year. And certainly they have put that out into their forecasts. According to their new forecasts, we're looking at interest rates staying higher for longer, yes, indeed, all the way into 2025. So entirely for next year, we're certainly seeing interest rates staying higher, possibly even higher than they are right now. That definitely made the market take notice. Not so much that they're holding them steady, but the warning there. And so the Kiwi at one point was it was above 62 US cents. And we haven't seen it that high for a long time. And there's been resistance at that level. So that it went above that meant the market is prepared to see it go higher yet. So we finished up today at 61.9 US cents, 93.1 Australian, 48.7 British pence. So pretty strong response from the market there on the Reserve Bank's statement.
Fisher & Paykel's first half-year result, it's got an enthusiastic response from the market. What's the reason?
Well, there's another one. So it was not so much on what they delivered in terms of their first half result. Their net profit, this is the company that makes respiratory equipment and has done very well out of COVID. So their net profit rose 12%. That's the first half to 107.3 million. Revenue was also up 16%. Some of that growth was from the hospital sales, but also from their home care. 26% growth in that sector, which was, I think, a little bit surprising to the market. But overall, those numbers weren't. So you might wonder, why would their share price have risen more than 11% on this result? And it was because of the outlook. The outlook was stronger than most were expecting. And what's interesting there is that any time a company now comes up with a stronger than expected outlook, the market rewards them. So right away, it was like straight up 11%, which is a pretty big hike for a company like Fisher & Paykel, which is already near the top end of the market. So it finished at a more modest 6% increase, which is still pretty strong for the market overall. And there was some down moments as well. Anytime there's a risk of higher interest rates, that tends to affect the markets. So we ended down 1 point to 11,236. It's quite an interesting roller coaster that we've been on this week.
Buckle up, Nona. Ka kite. Thank you for that. Nona Peltier with Business News. 25 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let's move on to an overseas story. Rescuers in India have freed 41 workers who have been trapped in a collapsed Himalayan tunnel for 17 days. Miners drilled the final section by hand to reach the workers in the 4.5 kilometre tunnel. The men who were brought out in wheeled stretchers through a 90 centimetre wide pipe were taken to hospital for checkups. No one was injured, amazingly. Marathon efforts to free them from the tunnel, which collapsed on November 12, overcame numerous setbacks, and the BBC's Samira Hussain reports.
This moment, more than 2 weeks in the making. 41 trapped workers finally rescued. An eruption of cheers from workers and onlookers. People sharing sweets and hugs.
These are the ambulances with the first workers that have come out from inside the tunnel. 17 days they have spent inside that tunnel, and now they are finally out and in those ambulances.
Rescuers spent the last several days pushing an 800-millimeter pipe through 60 meters of rubble and debris. Once through, the men were pulled out on wheeled stretchers, one by one. It's been a harrowing experience for the men inside and those working to get them out.
How do you feel?
Oh, after 12 days. Pretty good.
Jodari has been here for 14 days, watching the mouth of the tunnel and waiting for this moment where he could kiss his son.
I am very happy. I am 55 and I have seen life. But my son is very young. He has a long life. I want him to fight every storm in his long life.
The rescue operation that gripped the country finally has its happy ending.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on the 100-day plan from the government. Starts today. This person says, I oppose tax cuts as we've seen previously the state of buildings and infrastructure, for example, sewage running down hospital walls. The next government would be better to reduce the amount of middle managers. Dave's got in touch to say, seems to me that Mr Luxon and buddies should get used to swallowing rats a la Shane Reti while they defend their partners' policies foisted on them. Seems to me that ACT in New Zealand First got pretty much all their wish list. Even the treaty referendum gets a look in. And then, which obviously on the 100-day plan, repealing some legislation around smoking. This from Gus, who says, my father died of emphysema, aged 63 in 1980. It was tragic seeing him in bed, breathing from an oxygen bottle and still smoking before he was transferred to Southland Hospital to die. This government is taking us back 40 years. Cancel this policy, says Gus. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It's time to go to the headlines now. Anna is standing by. Ko Anna anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Christopher Luxon says he's confident his government can make good on its 100-day action plan, which today set out 49 actions the coalition will take. The first piece of legislation is intended to return the Reserve Bank to a single mandate of fighting inflation. The bank today kept the official cash rate at 5.5%. Meanwhile, a recently retired intensive care specialist is calling for Health Minister Shane Reti's resignation over the government's backtrack on smoke-free legislation. Dr Stephen Street, former clinical director of Organ Donation New Zealand, says smoking led to patients suffering heart attacks, stroke, lung disease and pneumonia. The Court of Appeal has reserved its decision on David Tamahiri's appeal against his 1990 conviction for the murders of Swedish tourists Urban Höglund and Heidi Parkinen. The decision will not be released until at least February next year. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has given a national apology to survivors of the thalidomide tragedy. It comes over 60 years after the morning sickness drug started causing major physical birth defects around the world. More than 140 Australians and 11 New Zealanders were compensated in a landmark settlement by the drug's distributor nearly 10 years ago. And sanitation workers at a tip in the US state of New Hampshire dug through 20 tonnes of trash to find a resident's lost wedding ring. Rubbish spokesman Dennis Senabaldi says it's the third ring they've recovered in the past 2 years. It's dedication for you, Lisa.
Isn't it just? Complete determination. Alrighty, Auckland's mayor is proposing to sell council assets to fund the rising costs of running the city and to put the brakes on rates rises. Wayne Brown wants the money to go into a $3 to $4 billion fund that would also make provisions for climate change risks. But opponents of the proposal are calling it asset stripping and a generational sale. Finn Blackwell has more.
While critics see it as a raid on the silver drawer, Wayne Brown says it will ease pressure on ratepayers. The proposal is part of the city's 10-year budget councillors have been debating today. Speaking to Midday Report, Deputy Mayor Desley Simpson says the proposal could lead to a better financial future.
It would potentially bring us more income and it would give us less reliance on the likes of our rates income because we're very conscious of that for Aucklanders. It would also reduce our risk, and that's really important at the council by diversifying our markets. Only we wouldn't all have our eggs in one basket.
She says the multi-billion-dollar regional fund would give the city a better return than its two biggest assets. However, not everyone is convinced. Councillor Mike Lee says it's asset stripping, plain and simple.
I'm not impressed at all, and anyone who has any knowledge of the performance of Auckland Council in recent years would realise that the council, to be frank, is not to be trusted with investment funds.
He says the mayor's proposal seems contradictory to what he campaigned on.
I have to point the finger squarely at the mayor. He campaigned as the guy who was going to fix Auckland, not as the guy who was going to asset strip Auckland. If your house needed fixing, you wouldn't want this type of person coming to fix it because you may end up with a cowboy fix-up job on your house.
But Mayor Wayne Brown says it's about utilising what they have.
It's not asset stripping, it's asset utilising. At the moment, we are asset stripping off ratepayers because we take more money off them just to prop up the ownership of those two things.
The Mayor says ratepayers have been subsidising importers for years.
The ratepayers should not subsidise importers. The ports should be subsidising ratepayers. That's why you own things for, but that hasn't happened.
He says the end goal of the fund is more than just financial security.
It's financial and asset security to the extent that should something goes wrong, there's a place to go and get some money to fix things from. So this city has no resilience, either financial or physical.
During the current financial year, the council's property insurance costs have risen more than 44%. The Mayor insists Ports of Auckland is not for sale, but it's worth considering a temporary lease of its operation. But Councillor John Watson says that's just the first step.
It is a generational sale. It's the lease that's getting bought out, but Auckland lose the control of that asset for whatever length of time it is.
In a statement to RNZ, the Port of Auckland said the ownership model is up to the council governing body, and they've been actively engaging with the Mayor and councillors on the matter. For now, they say they'll continue to focus on operational safety and efficiency, profitability, and delivering greater returns for Auckland Council and the region.
Let us know your thoughts on that. Do you agree with that? Selling off the last of the Auckland International Airport shares and a lease for the port to create a fund to pay for Auckland's rising operational costs. It is 5:45. Kia mau tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. For the first time ever, a large passenger plane has crossed the Atlantic powered only by alternative fuels. The Virgin Atlantic flight from London to New York ran on sustainable aviation fuel made from things like agricultural waste and used cooking oil. The BBC's Katie Austin reports.
Does this journey take us closer to guilt-free flying? There's no kerosene on board, only fuel made from fats and corn production waste. Progress, but not a silver bullet for an industry that's particularly hard to decarbonise.
Short-haul people can and most likely should go by train. Long haul across the Atlantic or across the Pacific, they have no choice. And so it's up to our industry to try to make it as sustainable for them.
Airline bosses say this flight shows what can be done. It doesn't mean it's about to become the norm. For alternative fuels like this to be used more widely, much more will have to be produced. And they're expensive. Plus, other technologies will be needed to hit emissions reduction targets.
We can't produce a majority of our fuel requirements this way because we just don't have the feedstocks. And even if you do, those fuels are not true net zeros. We have to treat it as what it must be, which is a stepping stone towards future genuinely net zero technologies, which might be e-fuels running conventional engines, it might be hydrogen.
Environmental campaigners say for now, people need to fly less.
We need to reduce the amount we're flying, and then we can potentially use those so-called sustainable fuels for the remaining flights that we are going to be taking in the future.
The government disagrees.
We want people to be able to continue flying, but we want to do it in a way that's consistent with the environment, which is why sustainable aviation fuel matters, hydrogen matters, electric flight matters. All of those things are part of this journey.
Airlines and ministers insist fuels like these can play a big part in making the industry greener, but there's still a long journey ahead, and it's likely to mean passengers pay more.
OK, thieves have cleaned out a small Canterbury church, taking its brass altar pieces and other precious religious items that are likely to be melted down. And it is the second time St Mark's in the Christchurch suburb of Marshland has been hit. People are being asked to contact police if they see any of the items for sale. Tammy Watson-Wells, who you may know as the Briscoes lady, has been playing the organ at the Little Anglican Church since she was 13 years old. And Tammy joins us now. Kia ora, Tammy.
Well, kia ora. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, people are often very disappointing, aren't they? This is a bit, well, I don't know, crappy, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely and totally. And And you just think, oh, why would you? But they don't know that, well, I'm sure the people that actually came back, they're the ones that had burgled it earlier in the year, back at Easter time, and I think they just came back to get the last little pieces that they hadn't got. And it's just like, really? Yeah.
So what have they cleaned out from the church, Tammy?
Well, just anything that was of value, and believe me, there's not much. So, yeah, as you were saying, the altar pieces, so anything that was brass, but then they must have known there were a few things that they needed to come back for, and they came in and they found the safe keys, and fortunately all the money, which is very little because we always take it away, but there was the chalice, which is sterling silver, but they took away a little trowel, and it's about 98 years old, and it was when the new church was rebuilt, so the new old church, and this little trowel that was encased in a little, like a little picture frame with glass, and it was to lay the foundation stone 98 years ago, and they took that, and so really they've taken everything, but they didn't take our spirit, so that's really nice.
They got candlesticks, I understand,
Yes.
and the christening bowl as well.
Yes, first time round they took that, so the christening bowl and the beautiful christening jug and the little brass vases and the bigger brass vases, and then a beautiful plate that when you take the offertory round, that you put it back up on the altar that way. So anything that's sort of been there my whole life, unfortunately, has gone. But it was really amazing, Lisa. I was down at the church and the forensics policeman was there, and he was just so lovely, and he said, just go public with it. He said, put it on Facebook. And I did, and the local Preston's Residents Association, and it's this big new subdivision that came about after the earthquakes when a lot of people had lost their homes, and it's this big area down the road, and so I put it on there thinking, well, look, people will hopefully see these things maybe in their garden, or they might know somebody who's seen them. And I just thought we might get the pieces back. But everyone was really lovely, and they just said to me, because a whole lot of groceries were stolen as well. We were collecting for the St Ambrose Food Bank, and they'd taken all the lovely Christmas things that we'd collected as a small congregation. And so people said on this Preston's Residents Association, can we donate to that? And I said, look, no, we just after the pieces off the altar. And then I thought, look, actually people want to help, and they are amazing. And they've just said, what can we do? And then New World Preston's, which is the local supermarket, I contacted them and I said, could we just be a collection point if people want to donate things? And they said, yes, absolutely. So really lovely things come out of awful things.
Yeah, polar opposites you've experienced then, it seems.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, what you're saying is it's likely these things are going to be melted down and sold because of the value of them. But, you've been going there since you were 13 playing the organ. I suppose the value is in the memories and the emotional connection to these items, which means they're irreplaceable, really, aren't they?
Yeah, totally. So they might not mean too much, but to us, because they've been there forever and a day, they're just really, really special, and we miss them. But it's quite amazing. You do learn that, look, even if you had to do church and do it with plastic or paper plates or whatever, it's okay. At first you're just devastated, and then you realise that you just adjust, so it was, but what was so gorgeous was how the people came through. But we'd just had a big meeting just before we were burgled over the weekend, and just going through all the funding for our EQC repairs, and that we need to sell some land to do that, and that doesn't even give us any necessary surety going forward, because just everyone's got to be very self-sustainable. So to get burgled straight after it was just really, really sad. So to see people wanting to support us was just lovely. It's really kind.
Yeah, and these people have taken food from the mouths of people who really need it, and Christmas presents for people who may not get it.
Yeah, exactly. But As Anna, your producer, said to me earlier, she said, well, look, maybe it was even people that just couldn't afford things themselves. So I have to look at it that way as well, too, don't I? And think, well, look, maybe they've done this because they couldn't afford things. So, you know, there's always so many ways to look at something, isn't there? And it's just lovely that good things come out of it. And, yeah, just blown away by people's kindness and their support. And just sometimes, you know, if they just, even on a wee Facebook message, they blow you a kiss, it's just quite lovely.
That is fantastic, Tammy. I'm glad to hear some good has come of it. That is Tammy Watson-Wells. You may know her as the Briscoe's lady. She's played the organ at that church since she was 13 years old, and it has been burgled for the second time this year. They're asking you, if you see stuff on Trade Me or other platforms, don't buy it and alert the police. Coromandel residents and holidaymakers are just weeks away from being able to cross the peninsula via the main road again. State Highway 25A was washed away in the summer storms, and a massive rebuild operation's been underway. The building of a bridge to span the huge abyss that the washed out road left has come in under budget and 3 years ahead of time. Crews have been working close to 24/7 to get the crucial connection rebuilt, with many having moved to the area to get the job done. Alison Craigie is an engineer for the builders of the State Highway 25A bridge and is pretty excited about the progress so far.
It's looking absolutely amazing. I can't believe how far we've come in such a short time frame.
It must be strange because obviously you see it every day, right? So you're seeing incremental progress, but I imagine it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, sometimes we just really do need to take a step back and think about the fact that, you know, 3 months ago we were still working on the piles, and just thinking about where we are now, we were almost there, the finish line's in sight.
How have you been able to do it so quickly?
It's a great question, and it's one I've just been thinking about. And there's honestly just so many factors that have played a key role in making this project just such a huge success. We've got an amazing team on the ground doing the work, and we've all had the same goal right from the start, just, you know, getting these communities reconnected, and everyone's just been working so hard to make that happen. We've been putting night shifts on as required, you know, to make sure we get over the line. There's just been also incredible support from like the outside suppliers and subcontractors. So just the whole industry seems to understand the importance of getting this bridge open. Also the design team have been really involved. I think we've basically had them on speed dial for whenever we need to run through things or, you know, go through alternative options. Yeah, just so many things. I can't even list them all right now.
Yeah, and the locals seem really happy, and they've got a huge respect for all of you working on that bridge and making it happen so fast. How does that make you feel?
Honestly, it just feels so special that the locals have been really welcoming. I even joined the local squash club while I've been in town, and they've been incredible. I've never felt anything like this before, and it's just, yeah, it's really, really made me enjoy spending this time in Thames, I have to say.
How is the squash club? Do you let them win?
Not always. Not really in my nature. But we've had some great matches down there, and I've just met some amazing people at the squash club, and honestly, I wouldn't have been able to get through this project without their support. They've just been so welcoming, and I can't say enough about the squash club.
Hey, bridges are your thing, right? You're an engineer, but you have mainly exclusively worked on bridges. What's the deal? What do you love about them so much?
Well, I don't really know how it happened. I kind of just worked on bridges when I was straight out of uni. Got thrown onto the Waterview Connection project, working on the bridges coming in and out of the tunnels there, and was lucky enough to be able to continue on some further bridge projects after that. And I don't know what it is, but I just love everything about them. The concrete, the steel, reinforcing, all the small details, and just, I really, really enjoy bridges.
You're a bridge nerd.
Yeah, a little bit.
So close to finishing. What do you reckon it's going to be like when you finally say, okay, that's it, she's done?
It's just, it's going to be so special. Just can't wait to see the communities being reconnected and, their reactions, just really, really looking forward to that moment when we start getting people from side to side.
I suppose living there, you have come to learn how much they probably rely on that stretch of road, have you?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things that probably people who aren't in those areas wouldn't really think about. You might have your business set up on one side, but you're basically losing all the work that you may have been getting from the other side. There's families that are disconnected. I don't know, there's people who go to school on one side and live on the other. It's a lot more than just batches, it's people's livelihoods, and it's just a massive, it's going to mean so much to everyone to get this bridge open.
What do you think it'll be like to see the first car go over?
Yeah, it's going to be special. I don't know who's going to have that honour yet, but it's definitely a moment that we're waiting for.
Maybe from someone from the squash club, Alison.
Yeah, definitely. They deserve it. Everyone deserves it.
And that is Alison Craigie, a bridge building engineer who's working on the State Highway 25A bridge. It's coming in under budget and 3 months ahead of schedule, which is pretty impressive. On smoking, some more of your feedback. This person says, smoking, drinking, speeding, behaving badly, eating poorly, it is a choice. I smoked cigarettes for decades, then one day said, I'm not doing this anymore, and stopped. It's called being committed to improving yourself. No one else can save you, says Paul.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Kia ora, ko Anna Thomas Tane. Wellington Mayor Tori Whanau says she is seeking professional help for a drinking problem after another incident of drunken behaviour in public. The admission follows questions by RNZ regarding an incident in an inner city bar 2 weekends ago. Nick James reports.
In a written response to RNZ, the Mayor says she has a problem with alcohol. She says the most recent incident seems to have been recorded, much to her great embarrassment and shame. The Mayor says she subsequently sought counsel from friends, family and colleagues and has been getting professional help. In July, Ms Whanau made a public pledge to change her drinking habits after admitting she was, quote, tipsy when she skipped out without paying a restaurant bill.
The Prime Minister says he's confident the government can make good on its 100-day action plan. At his first post-cabinet media conference since taking office, Christopher Luxon has laid out 49 actions the coalition government will take. Much of the plan is repealing laws introduced by the previous government, such as fair pay agreements and reforms to the Resource Management Act. It also intends to start on a number of commitments National agreed to as part of its deals with ACT and New Zealand First. Mr Luxon says the plan is ambitious but necessary. The first piece of legislation the new government intends to introduce is to return the Reserve Bank to a single mandate of fighting inflation. A recently retired intensive care specialist is calling for Health Minister Shane Reti's resignation over the government's backtrack on smoke-free legislation. The National-led government wants to scrap the legislation, which would have reduced the number of stores able to sell cigarettes to around 600 nationwide, and limit the strength of nicotine and make it illegal to sell tobacco to anyone born after 2009. Dr Stephen Street, who is also the Clinical Director of Organ Donation New Zealand for more than a decade, says he saw patients get limbs amputated, suffer heart attacks, stroke, lung disease and pneumonia, all from their exposure to smoking.
It's shameful behaviour. He's a disgrace to the profession. He's no right to be the Minister of Health. He should resign.
The Maritime Union is warning of massive price hikes on freight if Auckland Port is privatised. Mayor Wayne Brown wants to create the Auckland Future Fund, aiming to raise billions of dollars from the sale of airport shares and leasing the port operations. Russell Main from the Maritime Union has told Checkpoint privatisation of Australian ports through long-term leases had resulted in excessive profits for leaseholders. He says multinational logistics company DP World is interested in the lease.
Why is there so much interest from overseas, and why is DP World willing to pay such an exorbitant price for a lease? Common sense just says that they know they're going to gouge it and they know they're going to make money out of it. They don't care.
The union says the ongoing uncertainty around the port's future is a threat to the city's economic stability. Epidemiologist Michael Baker says he's concerned about his image being used to sell fraudulent products. The Otago University Public Health professor's image has been used on Facebook and Instagram to advertise a product called Blood Balance that claims to protect from diseases of the circulation system. He says he first became aware of the scam about a week ago. Professor Baker says he does not endorse the product and he encourages people to report it as a scam. Speculation is mounting that the ceasefire in Gaza will be extended beyond the current 6-day truce if more hostages are released. Qatar, which mediated indirect talks between Hamas and Israel that resulted in the ceasefire, is now hosting spy chiefs from Israel's Mossad and the United States CIA. The BBC's Paul Adams reports from Jerusalem.
There are pretty high hopes that there will be a second 48-hour extension. Beyond that, well, frankly, everything is up in the air. We don't know the state of the negotiations which have been going on. We know they've been going on. There are hopes that this process could continue, and as long as it continues to deliver day by day, as expected, the required number of people, then it is reasonable to assume that there will be intense efforts to keep it going.
Paul Adams says Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that when the ceasefire is over, he intends to send the military back into the Gaza Strip. The Crown maintains the evidence against David Tamahiri is still solid, despite false testimony being a part of its original case. The Court of Appeal has reserved its decision on the appeal of Mr Tamahiri's conviction for the murders of backpackers Urban Hoagland and Heidi Parkinen in 1990. The false evidence given by inmate Roberto Conchi Harris has been a key focus of the hearing. Crown lawyer Rebecca Thompson says it wasn't given weight by the jury in the 1990 trial because the judge made it clear it was unreliable.
We do have the judges summing up, recording second-hand its excoriating conclusion on Mr Harris's account as a complete fabrication. Everything either taken from newspaper stories or it was so bizarre as to be unbelievable.
Rebecca Thompson says the other evidence holds up and putting Mr Harris's evidence before the jury would not have affected the outcome. The man who attacked people with an axe on Auckland's North Shore has been acquitted due to insanity. 6 people were injured at 3 Chinese restaurants on Corinthian Drive in Albany in June. Appearing in the Auckland District Court today, the man, who has name suppression, accepted he carried out the attacks. But Judge Stephen Bonner KC has found that the man was insane at the time and so not legally responsible for his actions. He's been remanded in custody until a bed at the Mason Clinic psychiatric unit becomes available. And that's the news.
This Saturday morning, neuropsychologist Andy Mitchell tells us about his 10 trips. Psychedelic ones, that is. Professor Richard Jackson on why the military should be abolished. Greg Sestero of cult movie The Room and immortalised in The Disaster Artist talks about the film and friendship that changed his life and career. And Funky and Sexy, the Stud siblings, say the best things in life are cheese. I'm Susie Ferguson. Join me this Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow in the west from Northland to Taranaki, partly cloudy. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty in the central high country, cloudy periods and a few showers, becoming fine in Coromandel in the Bay of Plenty tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, isolated showers, clearing in Gisborne tomorrow evening. Wairarapa, also Whanganui to Wellington, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Wairarapa, clearing this evening. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, scattered showers, mainly inland this evening, becoming fine tomorrow morning, but cloudy periods remaining in Westland. For Canterbury, fine spells, but isolated showers inland, becoming cloudy tomorrow and showers becoming widespread in the evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, mainly in the south, isolated showers about the south coast, spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National, it is 8 minutes past 6 and your checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi e ho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. On day 5 of the truce between Israel and Hamas, 12 more Israeli hostages have been released in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. But the joy of those who were reunited with family members kidnapped by Hamas during October 7th attacks was tempered by the agonising wait for those whose loved ones are still captives in Gaza. The BBC's Orla Guerin reports.
It's a nerve-wracking wait for hostages to come home. Among them, a baby. The truce is due to end tomorrow. These are anxious hours. Will Kfir Bibas be freed? He's the youngest hostage, just 10 months old. Israel has taken him to its heart. Kidnapped with him, his brother Ariel, who's 4, and loves his Batman costume. Their mother, Shiri, held them in her arms, trying to protect them as Hamas closed in. Their father, Yarden, surrounded and bleeding, all 4 now hostages. Israel says Hamas has handed them on to another militant group in Gaza. Their relatives are tormented by worry and by waiting. How difficult have the last few days been when each day has come and gone and each list has come and gone and they have not come home?
It's dreadful. It's the worst scenario. Having to wait for that list every night. Seeing all those beautiful moments of reunion and hoping that us will be in the next day. And it's not.
Relatives and supporters are gathered here once again. They want to keep the pressure on the government. For all those released in recent days, many more remain trapped in Gaza. Their families are hoping against hope that the deal between Israel and Hamas will be extended once again. That deal has freed almost 200 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Here, the latest group to be released, arriving to jubilation in the West Bank tonight. It's mostly women and teenage boys who have been let out. In Gaza, while the ceasefire holds, a chance to survey the wreckage. The UN says there is hunger, desperation, and especially for women and children, the risk of famine. We see our homes getting destroyed and our dreams getting destroyed, says Mariam Abu Rajela. They gave us a 4-day truce. What good is that? Back in Israel, balloons are released for Kfir and Ariel in hope that they will soon see the sky again. Tonight there are indications that the ceasefire could be extended even further.
Nearly 2 months after being ripped from their homes and torn apart from their families, freed hostages are returning to completely different lives in Israel. Whilst some of them are waiting for other family members to be released, others are just learning for the first time their loved ones were killed. Thomas Hand thought his 9-year-old daughter, Emily Hand, had been killed on October 7. She'd been at a sleepover at a friend's house in the kibbutz Be'eru, where 130 residents, including her mother, were killed by Hamas. CNN's Clarissa Ward spoke exclusively with Thomas Hand about Emily's 50 days in captivity and moving from house to house in Gaza.
She said, "Jay, she'll be here in a couple of minutes." I was like, "Oh, don't believe it." And all of a sudden the door opened up and she just ran. It was beautiful, just like I imagined it, running together. I probably squeezed too hard.
It was a moment Thomas Hand thought would never come. Told his 9-year-old daughter Emily had been killed in the October 7th attacks, then that she was believed to be held hostage in Gaza. Finally, reunited with her family after 50 days in captivity, free but visibly haunted by her ordeal.
The most shocking, disturbing part of the meeting was she was just whispering. Couldn't hear her. I had to put my ear on her lips, like this close, and say, "What did you say?" And I thought you were kidnapped.
She said, "I thought you were kidnapped."
She thought I was in captivity.
And what has she told you about what she's gone through?
I thought she was in the tunnels, but she wasn't in the tunnels. They were actually fleeing from house to house. She doesn't like it to be referred to as Gaza. She says the kufsa, the box. So you have to say, like, how long were you in the box? The kufsa. She said a year. So, apart from the whispering, that was like a punch in the guts.
There's that one photograph right after your reunion, and you're holding her, and there is this sort of seriousness to her facial expression.
Yeah, she's almost staring, isn't she? A little bit of a disconnect with everything going on around her.
Has she cried?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Last night, she cried until her face was red and blotchy. She couldn't stop. She didn't want any comfort. I guess she's forgotten how to be comforted. I just had to wait until she came out of it by herself. And she knows how to do that. She's a very determined little girl, very strong. I knew that her spirit would get her through it.
There have been glimpses of the old Emily, happily walking the family dog Johnsy. But many moments of pain, like when Thomas was forced to break the news to her that his ex-wife Narkis had been killed.
Does Emily understand what happened on October 7th?
Yeah. Unfortunately, she does. How do you tell her, you know, your second mum is dead, killed, shot? When we got back to the hospital, I asked the psychiatrist, you know, what do I do? What should I do? What should I do? She said, you've just got to tell her straight. It's the best way. Okay. So yeah, that was very hard because we told her, and you know, her little eyes glazed up, and she just went, took a sharp intake of breath. Terrible thing to tell a child, but as they recommend that you have to close the book. It sounds cruel, but you have to stop that hope. So you've got to stop that. It has to be final. Our kiss is dead.
And so, what is the next step now? How long do you stay here? How do you start a new life?
The future is obviously get Emily back to health, and we will do that along the way. But the next thing is along the way is that we have to get all the children, obviously, all the women, all the men, all the hostages have to come back. They have to be brought back.
And that was Thomas Hand, the father of a released hostage, 9-year-old Emily. 17 minutes after 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Britain and Greece have become embroiled in a diplomatic row over the so-called Elgin marbles, which have been held in the British Museum since being removed from the Acropolis in Athens. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had been due to meet with his Greek counterpart to discuss the future of the priceless relics, but cancelled. The marbles, which formed part of the Parthenon sculptures in the Acropolis, were taken to London by Lord Elgin 200 years ago, and Greece has long called for their return. Here's the BBC's Chris Mason with more.
Made almost 500 years before the birth of Christ, they've been here in the UK since the 19th century. Pretty much ever since, Greece has wanted them back. The Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis meeting the Labour leader Keir Starmer.
Thanks for being here.
But then stood up by Rishi Sunak, prompting a domestic and international row. The Greek government is baffled and annoyed at what's happened, and the argument's making plenty of news there.
For sure, it's being noted as an individual behaviour of the British Prime Minister. A negative one with which we express, as the Prime Minister said, our intense dissatisfaction, frustration.
Here at the British Museum in London, where the marbles are, they are considering lending them to Athens. Downing Street claimed the Greek Prime Minister making the case for this publicly at the weekend led Rishi Sunak to cancel his meeting with him. But on display too here, skipfuls of domestic politics. This is a row about heritage and about culture. What is British and is displayed in Britain, what isn't and shouldn't be. But primarily, this is a row about politics, because the Conservatives and Labour have a different instinct on it.
The government set out its position about the Elgin marbles very clearly, which is they should stay as part of the permanent collection of the British Museum.
We want to concentrate on what really matters to people, and on this specific issue, I trust that the British Museum and the Greek authorities will continue to negotiate and come to a good agreement, and that's what I back them to do.
In other words, Labour wouldn't stand in the way of the British Museum if it does a deal to lend and so send the sculptures here to Athens.
No argument against that anymore. Only that the British Museum might not have any other interesting stuff to show us.
Others here criticise Rishi Sunak.
I think it's quite unprofessional, and in a diplomatic way you wouldn't expect that from a Prime Minister, of course.
And as for visitors leaving the British Museum today, what's your hunch?
I kind of think they maybe do belong back there. Yeah.
I would prefer that the artefacts stay here rather than go back to their home country.
Perhaps they should share them. That would be the fairest thing, I think.
I suppose the risk is
when somebody's got them, they won't give them back. Yeah, exactly.
A modern twist on a long-running dispute, dripping in ancient history and contemporary politics.
To Australia now, where the Albanese government is scrambling to pass legislation that would see criminals recently freed from immigration detention put back behind bars. It comes after a landmark High Court decision which paved the way for more than 140 people, including murderers, sex offenders and drug smugglers, to enter the community. The ABC's Evelyn Manfield reports.
With just days before Parliament's long summer break, the government is trying to come up with what it calls rigorous and robust legislation.
We are moving quickly to finalise a tough preventative detention regime before Parliament rises. The safety of Australian citizens is our utmost priority.
Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill has revealed Labor's intention after the High Court published its reasons for ruling that indefinite immigration detention is unlawful, while also appearing to leave the door open for some people who've been released into the community to be redetained. Dan Tehan is the Shadow Immigration Minister.
What we want to do is immediately put a preventative detention regime in place. The government has said that they've got something ready. So now let's put that to the test. Have they got something ready? Because if they do, we look forward to working with them.
Constitutional law professor Luke Beck from Monash University has some suggestions.
So if the federal parliament was to pass a federal version of those state-based preventative detention laws, that would probably be okay as long as they are very narrowly targeted to where there is an actual, meaningful, unacceptable risk of those kinds of really serious things happening. And it would only be a very small number of people who've just been released from immigration detention that are in that category who might be somebody who was at risk of committing a terrorism offence.
Acting Legal Director at the Human Rights Law Centre, Sanmati Verma, has concerns.
Other than to pander to public opinion, there should be no reason to enter into a debate of that nature at this point. We would caution the government and the opposition, with whom the government appears to be working very closely, against swapping one constitutional problem for another. Creating a scheme like that in relation to people who are being detained simply because they don't have a visa does not make sense and will raise serious constitutional concerns.
As the government races to respond, another legal battle is growing. A second High Court challenge has been launched to Labor's new laws requiring the recently released detainees to wear ankle bracelets and follow a curfew. The latest case is involving an Afghan refugee.
I understand that several challenges have already been commenced and that several more challenges are in the wings.
For weeks, the opposition's been claiming the government has botched its response to the initial High Court ruling. The Greens immigration spokesman, Senator Nick McKim, isn't impressed by the debate.
What we have seen is refugees having their human rights trampled, once again being used as a political football with no thought at all about the impact that that is having on their lives. It's a disgraceful continuation of a bipartisan lockstep of cruelty towards refugees that has run through this country for far too long, and it needs to end.
Amid the political jostling, it's clear we haven't seen the last of the changes to Australia's immigration detention system.
Survivors of the harmful morning sickness drug thalidomide were in the public gallery when Australia's Parliament made a national apology to them on the 62nd anniversary of the drug being withdrawn from sale in the country. Thalidomide, also sold under the brand names Contigan and Distaval, were available in 46 countries and caused birth defects, stillbirths and miscarriages. Survivors with limb deformities and one with no limbs were in the House of Representatives gallery to hear the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's apology. The ABC's Nicole Price reports.
The drug thalidomide was created in the late 1950s and was designed as a sedative. In Australia, it was originally marketed as Distaval. It was recommended by doctors as a remedy for morning sickness. Despite being initially thought safe, the drug caused serious birth defects if it was taken in the early stages of pregnancy. Australian doctor William McBride was instrumental in the detection of thalidomide as a cause for the abnormalities, and production of the drug was stopped in 1961. Despite only being available for a few years, an estimated 10,000 people worldwide were affected. Around half of them died at birth or shortly after. In 1968, the thalidomide court trial took place in Germany. 9 senior Grünenthal employees were criminally charged. The trial was eventually terminated without a judgment. The company has since issued an apology and established a foundation to support those affected.
For most, a cruise is a chance to see the world and put your feet up, but one passenger who did this in the south of France discovered it isn't without its hazards when a spider decided his toe might be the perfect place to lay its eggs. Now, a warning to arachnophobes out there. This report from the BBC's Terry Egan, well, it's a little bit icky.
If Colin Blake and his wife thought a cruise to Marseille would be the perfect holiday to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary, what they probably didn't know was that's exactly where wolf spiders often sail to, arriving in the port on cargo ships. So when Colin noticed his toe turning purple and swelling up, he thought it might just be because of his new sandals. The day after, though, he visited the onboard doctor, who told him he'd been bitten.
It was really going purple, yellow, all kinds of colours. And the ship's doctor proceeded to, with a scalpel, split my toe open and then squeeze out what looked like sort of milk, but with tea leaves in. And I'm going like, what's those little dots? And he went, well, he said, they're eggs, but don't worry, I've got them all.
Except that he hadn't. Back in England, from where Colin had started his journey, doctors discovered that one of the eggs had hatched after all. For weeks, a spider had been eating its way through his toe, and now had to be popped out. Luckily, wolf spiders aren't poisonous. But Colin will probably think twice about where he chooses to put his feet up next time round.
Whoa, high gag factor involved with that one. Now, finally tonight, despite being pretty big on the cheese factor, Now That's What I Call Music has become the biggest selling series of compilation albums in the world. And can you believe it? It's now marking its 40th anniversary. Their albums, which compile the latest pop hits of the day, have sold more than 120 million copies and sparked copycat efforts around the world. The BBC's music correspondent, Mark Savage, takes a look back at the album series that, let's face it, has been part of the soundtrack to many of our lives.
Phil Collins' You Can't Hurry Love was track 1, side 1 on the first ever Now That's What I Call Music album. Since then, the compilations have featured more than 2,000 artists and 675 #1 singles, covering everything from Queen
I want to break free
to the Venga Boys. Robbie Williams has appeared more than anyone else, 38 times in total. And the most featured group are the X Factor winners, Little Mix. The series has now hit its 116th edition, and sales are strong despite the advent of streaming services like Spotify. The DJ Mark Goodyear has been the voice of the adverts for the Now albums since 1992. He says there's still a place for compilations curated by humans rather than playlists powered by artificial intelligence.
AI doesn't know which song was playing when you walk down the aisle. An AI hasn't had a record played at a funeral. And the people who are really good at selecting records, either on a streaming service or in a compilation album like Now, or on the radio, they're very few and far between.
If the series manages to continue, it's scheduled to release its 200th edition just in time for Christmas 2051.
And that is us for the evening. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. And as always, if you missed anything on the program, you can find us on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tūtahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up talks to one of the strongest women in Aotearoa about how the memory of her father helped her smash a powerlifting world record. Do tune in for that. It's a weighty, weighty story.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Wellington Mayor Tori Whānau says she's seeking professional help for a drinking problem after an incident at a city bar 2 weekends ago. The coalition governments set out a 100-day 49-point action plan, beginning with returning the Reserve Bank to a single mandate of fighting inflation. The Maritime Union says privatising Auckland's port would lead to massive price hikes on freight. It's one of Mayor Wayne Brown's proposals to raise billions of dollars, along with selling Auckland airport shares. At an Otago University epidemiologist is urging people to report an online scam using his image to sell a dodgy blood product. Professor Michael Baker wants social media firms to take more responsibility for content. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
In 1993, Peter Ellis was sent to jail for abusing children at the Christchurch Civic Creche.
So if I'd gone to two of the other two places, the Civic Creche case may never have been.
But Peter Ellis said he didn't do it.
Well, you don't even think you're going to deal with something like this, so how do you deal with it when it happens? It was awful.
Conviction, the Christchurch Civic Creche case, tells the full story of the case that has gripped a nation for more than 30 years. Follow Conviction on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you find your podcasts. And you can listen to the series every Sunday after the 7pm news on RNZ National.
28 minutes to 7. Kia ora, you're listening to Trending Now, and we begin with the detail. Anti-smoking researchers are promising a healthy fight against the new government's moves to repeal world-first legislation on tobacco sales.
Here's something that wasn't on the radar during the election campaign.
I wonder if we could start first with the issue of the smoke-free legislation, which I understand was the New Zealand First policy, not a National Party policy, but you agreed to the scrapping of this. Where's the good bit in this?
The smoking change, you on board?
Well, again, it was a big issue for New Zealand First Act. For us, we weren't on board with some of the changes that the government had proposed with the legislation
Winston Peters and David Seymour were reportedly insistent that Siggy